In history, the Middle Ages are known for not having any very interesting events. There were plagues and the Crusades, but what else? There was a lot of mud, people were hungry, and, well, these ages are kind of like January in history. Nobody is having any more fun. The blues have set in, and everyone is just waiting for something interesting to happen. But that's not really true. A lot of progress was made in the Middle Ages. Interesting engineering says that the world today might be very different if people hadn't invented things like the printing press, mechanical clocks, and even eyeglasses in the Middle Ages. The astrolabe, a really cool tool from the Middle Ages, is where computers got their start. If you look at England in the Middle Ages, you won't just see guys banging coconuts together and strange women lying in ponds passing out swords. There were many things going on, some of which were very strange. Each bite of bread could have been the end. In today's world, bread may seem like the dullest and least upsetting food ever, but in the Middle Ages and across Europe, every bite could have made you very sick. A fungus called ergot was to blame. Unknowingly, grains that were infected with it were used to make bread, and anyone who ate a loaf quickly went crazy, as Lapham's Quarterly puts it. It was easy to see the physical signs. The worst ones were arms and legs that would turn black and blue. According to National Geographic, the fungus affects the body's blood flow. There were also dreams, though. The disease was named St. Anthony's Fire because it made people feel like they were on fire. There are stories of whole towns being infected with the fungus and many people cutting off their own limbs to try to put out the fire. And a lot of people knew about it, especially in cool, damp parts of Europe. A lot of people thought the illness was a sign from God, especially since it was associated with fire and hell. To help the sick, religious groups dedicated to St. Anthony opened hospitals, and charm from the 1400s discovered in North Lincolnshire suggests via the Met that people often called on St. Anthony to protect them. After all, no one wants to be in so much pain that they think the only way out is to cut off their own arms and legs. Public hygiene and prostitution went together. Many people say that people in the Middle Ages didn't take baths, but that's not true. Medievalists have helped historians find a lot of medieval books that talk about how important it is to be clean. After all, cleanliness is next to godliness. And people in medieval England were very religious. Lots of people knew how important it was to be clean, but it was hard to take a bath. For that reason, public showers were very important. Not many people had their own bathtubs. There were 18 bathhouses in the town of Southwark on the Thames. Now things get weird. People quickly learned that bathhouses were more than just places to take a bath because they were open to both men and women. And those bathhouses in Southwark got the name stews because they were whores. The bathroom was thought to be a place where people would see more than they expected when they went there to clean up after a long day in the fields. If you can't beat 'em, join 'em, so said the ancient church. By the 15th century, the Bishop of Winchester was making a lot of money from the laws he wrote to keep an eye on the sex workers who were working at the Southwark stews. Kicking kids out of the house at what age? Kids stay with their parents for a lot longer now than they used to. What about England in the Middle Ages? Let's look at it through a letter written by a Venetian who was shocked by what he saw there. He told the BBC that children were kept with their parents till the age of 7 or 9 at the utmost. After that, they were sent to hard service in the homes of other people, binding them generally for another 7 or 9 years. He wrote that it was for everyone, boys and girls, rich and poor. As you say goodbye to your first grader, picture yourself giving them the best of luck in life. According to historians, the years 7 and 9 weren't set in stone, and a lot of kids stayed with their parents until they were 10 or 14. The Venetian in question said it was because families didn't think they had to feed someone else's child, as well as they would want to feed their own. It was also done so that kids could learn a trade that their parents couldn't teach them. But since most kids that age couldn't read or write, even if they just moved to the next town over, they would almost certainly not talk to their parents at all. It was the first way to learn from a distance. Shaming parades in medieval England. In medieval England, there was no social media to point out other people's flaws and mistakes. Today, people love to do this. Instead, they held parades to shame people. Londonist says the idea of shaming people in public has been around for hundreds of years and was also very clever. The sentences were often based on the crime. For example, a tavern owner who was caught selling bad alcohol might have to drink it himself before being dragged through the streets. Then there were the cases of people who stole pigs. A dead pig was hung around their necks and a crown of pig's feet was put on top of their heads as they were led through the city. This idea of embarrassing people in public has been around for hundreds of years and has included tools like the pillory. Shaming people in that way has been done since at least 1318. It wasn't just putting your head and hands through a board and holding them there. People were sometimes nailed there. There were definitely deaths there. Some were hit with rocks, broken glass, and even dead cats, and others are known to have fallen through the platform they were standing on and were slowly choked. Killing the tooth worm. Even though no one likes going to the doctor, here's a good thought. It was even worse in England in the Middle Ages. Back then, anyone who went to the doctor could hear that they had tooth worms in their mouth. People used to think that there were real worms living inside teeth that made them rot. The National Library of Medicine says that holes and pits in teeth were thought to be caused by a worm that looked like a small eel. People from different countries had different ideas about tooth worms. Some thought they looked more like maggots, which is even worse. Getting rid of it? A report in the British Dental Journal says that natural treatments were preferred over pulling the tooth, which is not better. They said to burn it as near the tooth as possible to get rid of the worm. The candle was made from sheep's fat and a mix of seeds. People thought that the worms would run away from the heat and land in a dish of water that was put under their mouth. It's not said how many times that water was used to put out the patient's fire. An eye for an eye. Some people might think that in medieval England, justice would have been quick and bloody. But new study from the universities of Leicester and Hertfordshire shows that wasn't the case, or at least that wasn't the goal. They learned that some punishments, like being shamed in public, paying a fine, or being kicked out of a society, were worse than, say, losing a hand. When people were punished violently, the goal wasn't to hurt them so badly that they would change, but to leave a mark on them so that everyone they met for the rest of their lives would know what they had done. A lot of crimes were punished by religion in the early Middle Ages. A person could do something like fast, and it would be up to God to decide if they needed more punishment through the holy hand of justice. But as time went on, it became more normal to cut off that hand or foot or just brand someone. According to Londonist, marking people, usually on the face, continued until the 1800s. Most of the time, a letter that showed what crime you had was used as the brand. For example, if you were found guilty of slander, you might get a B. No matter where you went, everyone would know what you did after that took place. Come here, kid, and let me poke that. Some people thought that being a king in the Middle Ages was the best way to get through them with the least amount of trouble. But it wasn't all fun and games. The Royal College of Physicians says that some kings were supposed to cure a sickness known as the king's evil, which is pretty gross. It all began with Edward the Confessor, who was King of England in the middle of the 1100s. His fame grew when he touched someone with scrofula, the aforementioned king's evil, and healed them. No one was going to let go of that kind of miracle. So for hundreds of years afterward, it was the job of English and French kings to touch sick people and heal them through what people thought was an incarnation of God. There were really big healing events. At one court that Louis XIV held, about 1,600 people came to be touched by the king. Also, it's important to explain what scrofula is and what the brave kings and queens were feeling. Healthline says that scrofula is like TB but affects other parts of the body besides the lungs. As a little extra information to finish the picture, it shows up as sores and swollen lymph nodes that can get very big and start to leak pus. The Walking Dead of medieval England. Because of how famous The Walking Dead was, zombies became popular again. This may seem like a new idea, but people in medieval England thought they lived there. Language teacher Jill Clements from the University of Alabama says it's important to remember that people in the Middle Ages interacted with the dead and dying more directly than people do today. The family was in charge of taking care of the body after most people died at home. So it shouldn't be a surprise that there were a lot of stories about people who thought their dead loved ones had come back to life. Some of the stories are religious or obviously made up, but others aren't. In the early Middle Ages, people believed in the revenant, which is a dead body that comes back to life. Geoffrey of Burton wrote down a story from the town of Drakelow, which can be found at the University of Manchester. People in the village thought they were being visited by ghosts, so they dug up recently buried men and saw that their bodies seemed to be in good shape. They cut off the heads and put them at the feet of the bodies, then took out the hearts and reburied the bodies. How often did that happen? In 2004, archaeologists found a burial ground in Suffolk with 52 bodies. When they dug up the graves, they found that 17 of the bodies had been buried with their heads cut off and put at their feet. Pee in this cup, I'll tell your fortune. Some things should be kept secret, talked about alone in the bathroom, or at the very least, kept between a person and his doctor, because many people in medieval England thought that the color, consistency, and taste of a person's pee could be used to figure out almost anything wrong with them. That idea definitely didn't apply to urine. Atlas Obscura says that diagnosis by pee has been done since at least 100 BC. It first showed up in ancient Sanskrit writings around that time and stuck around for a very long time. In the late Middle Ages, it was so common that people didn't bother with doctors and instead diagnosed themselves. Medievalists said that only very wealthy people could do it with the help of books that had color pictures of pee bottles and the diagnosis that went with them. Atlas Obscura says that wasn't really true because they hadn't mastered color printing yet. The 13th century work by Giles Courbet called On Urines was exactly what it sounds like. What did he teach? White was the best color because it meant everything was working right. If someone's urine was wine-colored, blue, or black, that meant they had been dancing too much, in which case it was normal. What if it's green? You heard the sound of death. Are they married? There is someone in every town who loves to talk about what other people are doing whenever they can. That was really taken to a whole new level in medieval England. History Extra says that, among other things, one of the biggest fears of people living in London in the Middle Ages was whether they were going to heaven or hell. As part of that idea was the idea that sex should only happen in marriage, but marriage was not always easy. A lot of the time, there wasn't a big ceremony, and there wasn't any paperwork to file with different countries. A couple was legally married if they asked each other, "Want to get married?" And the other person said, "Sure," in their own home, without anyone else there. That was all that was needed for a marriage to be legal. But it was a whole different story when it came to showing it legal or not, in the eyes of the public. People thought that having sex was the same thing as getting married, since marriage and having a wedding were seen as two different things. It was the rite of marriage, and the wedding was the big show for the guests. People also thought that God was the only witness that was needed, and since God is always looking, consent could be given in secret. Scary? Yes. And people did take over other people's businesses. You were being judged on your tears. Aeon says that crying is only something girls do these days. No, it wasn't always that way. In medieval England, both men and women were supposed to cry freely. The creepy part was when people judged others based on how many tears they were crying, how long they were crying, and how often they were crying. While tears are seen as a normal reaction to bad things happening, there is another type of tear called the gift of tears. History Extra says this was a sign that someone was overwhelmed with feeling as they thought about Christ's suffering and began to cry. People thought these tears were a gift from God and made them stand out as especially religious, as long as they were real tears. If you cry too much, too often, or too loudly, people might start to think that your tears aren't really from God. One example is Marjorie Kempe. She cried so much that preachers had to tell her to be quiet during services so she wouldn't bother the people there. A lot of people thought she was very holy, but others thought she might be drunk, sick, or possessed by a devil who was making her look holy, but was actually wrong. St. Peter Damian, who lived in the 1100s, said that this fake crying did not come from heavenly dew, but had gushed forth from the bilge water of hell. What's the lesson here? Watch how you cry. Bloodletting and barbers. Barber poles have red and white stripes because they used to be doctors. This is a fact that is often said. The red is for the blood and the white is for the bandages. This is something that almost everyone knows. It's not quite that simple. The journal Hectoan International, a journal of medical humanities, says that barbers and doctors were not the same for a long time. In the early Middle Ages, master and apprentice doctors were even put in different groups and given different names. This sounds like a good thing. In the 1400s, barbers could do more than just cut hair. They could also set broken bones and heal cuts on the skin. A completely different group was made up of surgeons, who did operations and amputations. That was true until 1540, when Henry VIII combined them. This was a long time after the Middle Ages were over. In the same way, let's quickly talk about bloodletting, which was a very famous medical practice in medieval England. The leech picture is well known, but the fact that the BC Medical Journal says there were other ways is enough to make it worth noting. Scarification was done with some tools, which scraped off pieces of skin. Other tools, like lancets, were used to cut open veins, sometimes even the jugular. We hope you liked this video, subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about what civilization or time period we should talk about. Also, watch another video here.